Okay, another important concept is that of positioning. This is a concept that originated a number of years ago, and it did so because the problem in modern markets is standing out. The idea of positioning was that your product or service has to be, in some sense, unique in what it offers. Now, it doesn't mean that it actually has to have something so superior to anything else, but in the marketing of it, you need to emphasize one particular trait or one particular feature, we call a feature, which will stand out and which will make it something that unique in the marketplace. Otherwise, people just won't notice it at all. And of course, this also gets into what we call branding, which we'll study later in the course. Okay? Trying to figure out a position for your product is thinking about how is it different from other similar products. Why should people buy the product as opposed to some other product? What's the unique benefit? All of these things have to do with positioning. One of the most important rules in positioning is be the first in a position. You're looking at a guy who was the first to cross the Atlantic, and most people will know, in an airplane, and most people know that's Charles Lindbergh. Most people wouldn't know the guy on the right, and he was like the second guy to cross the Atlantic. Okay, so if you're not the first to do something or the first in a position, then probably people won't remember you much. The second is remembered. Okay, who's that guy? Well, he was the second president of Israel. Who that one is on the left, you'll know right away. Ben Gurion, the first one, right? You always remember the first. The second, a little harder, and that goes for products as well. Position statements. This is something that will be dealt with more in the text, but the idea is that you can kind of come up with a formula that will state a position in clear terms and will contain all the elements that you need for a clear position. And what are those things? Well, first of all, you need a name. Okay, that's why I put an MS word in red here. You need a name for your product. Naming a product is part of what you do as a Marcom person. Some products have names when you go out into a company already and work with it. Other times they will actually pay you to come up with a name, or you may be the Marcom manager and you will have to come up with a name for the product or a better name for the product. And this is not a trivial thing because names can be difficult to come up with that will stand out and that will be taken the right way by the market, that will be understood by your market, and it will have some kind of an emotional impact as well. It's not simple. You need also, the second thing in red there is word processor. You need to come up with a category. What is it? Is it a word processor? Is it a database? Is it some kind of a specialized medical device that's used by cardiologists? And does it fit into some category? It's very important to categorize what you're dealing with. If it doesn't have a clear category, it's very difficult to market it. The most important thing then after the name and the category is what's the main reason why people should buy it. We call that compelling reason to buy. In this case, that enables you to quickly produce professional looking documents using a wide range of tools. Okay, so you've got to come up with the main reason of buying something. This is really what makes the position. And then lastly, in the position statement, we put how it's different than other like products. Okay, the statement of differentiation. Unlike other word processors, Word, for example, has an intuitive, easy-to-use interface, and etc. Now, this statement is not meant to be a Marcom advertisement. This is not an advertisement. It's not a slogan. It's not something that you have to come up with as a jingle. It's meant to be a clear position that your manager or the head of the company or the people who are marketing this understand. And they understand that once they understand this and they conceptualize this and they think about it, then they can still help you come up with the materials you need. Or you can come up with a different writing that you need. But you can't write about something that you have no idea what's its main point. What does it do? Why is it better than everything else? Why do people need it? If you don't do that, then you're really just kind of writing any old thing, and it might be right, it might not be right. It might sell something, and it might not. By the way, I meant to emphasize also the very first part in green here, for anyone who needs to. That's the audience. In other words, what is the market? Which market? Is it for coal mining engineers, or is it for secretaries or medical, cardiologists or whatever? Who is the audience? Who is the market? That's the actual market that you state out first. But again, this position statement, and there's two two-sentence statement is not meant to be a slogan or an advertisement. Please don't confuse that. It is meant to be a thought piece, okay, that will get people thinking and will enable people in the company to properly understand why their product is out on the market in the first place. Believe me, this is the hardest part. I've seen many companies come up with new products and they have very vague ideas of what the product really does and how it can really do anything for anybody. And they never get past a name and maybe even the category they're kind of not too decisive about. And sure enough, it fails. Okay, this is something in the second lecture already that we get into, this technology adoption model. This is something that has to do with the fact that high-tech products are normally undergo a rather kind of call it a pathway to adoption in the wider market. In other words, people don't just right away adopt your new product and say, oh, this is great, I think I'll try this. High-tech products are oftentimes very expensive, both in terms of the initial cost and also in terms of the long-term cost, the cost of training people to use it, the cost of changing over your company to use a new accounting program or a new database program or whatever it is. This involves a lot of work and strategy, and it could cost billions of dollars really for a big company if they change over to this new system, unless they do it the right way and unless they get the right product. If they go for the wrong product, they actually may lose to their competition because they adopted some kind of a management program that doesn't do as well. And if they have hundreds of stores all across the United States, for example, this may be the key to either succeeding or not. Therefore, there is a kind of a cycle, as much as not a cycle, but it's a kind of a progression of how the technology is adopted. It actually originally came from the way farmers adopted seed, new seeds in the Midwest, and this guy named Moore, who used this the same idea, the same model, to show how new technologies are adopted by high-tech markets. Well, you start out with what's called the innovators, who are the people who are the most likely to adopt a new technology. These are people who are very excited about new stuff. They really get into new gadgets. These are kind of geeky people. And they're the people that you probably want to approach first. There are not that many of them, actually, compared to the others. They are the eggheads, kind of like the real intellectuals and the real scientists. But they do get interested in new stuff. And therefore, you probably want to even give them a chance to get your product for free or to look it over or whatever, in return for some kind of endorsement or some feedback about your product in some way. The next group is called the early adopters, and these are people who psychologically they also are looking for new stuff, but they're less looking for it for the gadgety side of it, the feature side of it. They're more interested in the potential of the new product to change their profession in some way, to give them the upper hand over their competitors, and they're excited about new stuff. And these are called early adopters. Sometimes they're called visionaries, the visionaries. Once you get past them, once you're able to sell to them and market to them, well, then you've got the early majority to deal with, which is a much bigger market. As you can see, that's why the curve goes up like that. It means that even though they're later in the model, but there are many more of them. These are people who are less into products and how they work and less into visionary ideas, but they just want something that works in their company. This is the majority of people out there, and they're not so much into the technology as they just want something that really works well, whether they're running a bank or they're running a supermarket or a chain of supermarkets. It doesn't matter. The idea is they want a product that is stable and they can rely on it, and it doesn't need a lot of messing around with to get it working, whereas the earlier people, the innovators and early adopters, will actually they will tolerate a certain amount of faults in the early program or device, because they figure, well, they'll get in early and later it will improve, which is usually the case. But the early majority wants something that really works. They're interested in the potential of, not just potential, I should say, in the actual returns. They want to see whether this thing is really going to make their company run better, or they're going to have greater efficiency, and at the end of the line, the bottom line is that they're going to make more money. The late majority then comes afterwards, and there's less of these than the early majority, but still they're a pretty big group. These are people who are out there that really don't like technology. I mean, they just want something to work. They want to be able to press a button, and they want this thing to run. Okay, so they constitute an awful lot of people, and they are actually this curve is not quite properly put here, because the late majority actually is almost as many as the early majority. It's still a majority. It's a lot, and there are a lot of people out there who don't particularly love technology, but they know they have to use it. People who use computers and the internet and different applications, they will use these things because they need it for their business, and therefore they might not want to, but they're okay. But they need products that are very, very well, polished. They need a product that's been out there for a while, and that definitely is going to be easy to work with. They don't want any new stuff. The laggards are kind of like these weirdos at the end, which are sort of like the mirror image of the innovators. They don't like technology at all. They don't want to have anything to do with it. I mean, these would be like the Pennsylvania Dutch. People ride around in horse and buggies till this day, and they're not interested in using too much technology. Normally, you don't want to bother with marketing to them because it's just too much energy to market anything to them, but they can sometimes be useful for understanding why do people not like your technology, or they don't like technology at all. Well, what would they like to have, okay? So sometimes you can learn something from them, but you don't want to usually waste your time marketing to them. Now, there's something called, more claimed, there's something called the chasm, which is a divide between the early adopters and the early majority, okay? The first group, the innovators and early adopters, are one group, and then there's this chasm that is difficult to get over and get to the early majority. Actually, I showed it here as part of the early adopters. Like, you could break down the early adopters in a way, you could show them that there's a kind of a midway point between the early adopters and the little later early adopters. Some people like to draw the chasm actually between early adopters and the early majority. But the idea is that there is a divide where the early people are interested in the product and its features and how it works and what it can do. And the people that come after that chasm are people that are less interested in the product but more interested in what it can do for them. Okay, they don't want to know about every little feature and how it works and how you developed it and all the cool stuff. They just want it to work in their profession. Now, many companies don't understand how to get over that chasm. They start out, of course, as a high-tech company with lots of high-tech people who are themselves very, very interested in all these features and gadgets and scientific and engineering factors, and they don't understand the psychology of marketing that says that people don't buy something because it runs at a certain speed or because it has all kinds of cool inner workings in the chips and the microprocessors. They buy it because they want it to do something, and therefore there has to be a change in the whole marketing strategy from the first kinds of people to the second. You've got to switch from thinking about features to thinking about benefits, about what it can do for you, not just how many wonderful things it has about it, but what can it actually do with it, the wonderful things. And that's where many companies fail, especially Israeli companies, because they don't always understand marketing so well, but they're very good, they have really great products. So sometimes instead of just falling into the chasm and going out of business, as some do, they just sell out to larger American corporations, and they get bought out. And of course, the Americans do know marketing pretty well, and therefore they are able to market the Israeli products. Well, you start with the innovators, and that's how you gain a beachhead. You don't just try to market your product directly to the early majority. Yes, they are very rich, and there are a lot of them, but no one will buy your product because they don't know what it is yet. So you have to start somewhere. You start with these innovators who are really into gadgets and new stuff. You start with being product centered and thinking about features and showing everybody how exciting it is. And then you end up with market-centered marketing, which is, again, emphasizing benefits and that type of thing, as I just mentioned. This is a bit of a complicated drawing, but essentially it follows another kind of a progression that kind of parallels the one we just looked at in the technology adoption. At the beginning of the way, what's important is knowledge and giving people understanding of how things work, how different features were developed and this type of thing, and much more on a scientific level. And then it comes like this persuasive stage where you have to try to show how things not only work but how they could be applied in your profession. And then there's the decision aspect where people have to make a decision whether they really want to use this new stuff or not, and whether they really want to buy it. Once they buy it, they then go to the implementation and then confirm to see whether it really works and really if it was worth it to buy it in the first place. That's a decision process, and it kind of parallels a little bit what we said before, although I don't really emphasize this is not in the written lecture actually. Okay, what I just mentioned just now. Types of Marcom materials are also discussed in the second lecture, but you can read that on your own. It goes on to we were going to go over all of these in the course. There'll be a separate lecture on brochures, on white papers, on web copy, and trade shows, and on company profiles. Case history and application notes is less important for Marcom. It's more technical writing, actually. Marcom plan, the strategy and tactics of Marcom plans is discussed at length in the second lecture. You'll see that. The idea is you have to start with some kind of a plan. You can't just write up Marcom materials, such as the brochures and white papers and web stuff without any kind of a plan. You have to understand, why are you doing this? It costs money to write up a brochure. It may take several weeks of research and doing things. You have to figure out whether you really need a brochure in your company, for example. So start out with some research first. First thing you do, you learn everything about the product that you can, all its features, all its benefits. You look at the positioning. How is the product positioned? Why does it stand out? How do you want to brand it? That comes later in the course. We'll look at that. What are the product's main features, as I mentioned before, and what's been done already, and what kind of marketing has been done already. What do you have a website up? Do you have a blog? Do you have are there brochures? Are there data sheets? Are there all kinds of other materials? Find out and do a kind of an overall report on that. Okay. Next thing, as you'll see in the Marcom plan in the lecture itself, after you get through the initial research phase and you've learned all about the product and what's been done in terms of the marketing of the product, the history of the marketing, you will eventually come up with some kind of a strategy. Now, the strategy primarily should be based on the strategy we just saw earlier, the technology adoption progression, where you first go to innovators, and then afterwards you go to the visionaries, then you go to the majority people, and then that's pretty much it. Then you really make the big money. Okay. That's the overall strategy. Now, you may have something more specifically, like who are the innovators in your profession? Who are they? If it's a teaching profession, are they separate certain kinds of schools that will normally get into very innovative kind of software and teaching methods and that type of thing? Or is it certain key individuals? You have to come up with some kind of a plan. Which markets are you going to approach first? Would they be the innovators of a certain type in a certain area? You have to, more specifically, just innovators. And you come up with an overall schedule of how you're actually, the progression of these approaches. And then you want to look at the goal and the milestones. So where are you trying to get at the end? What do you want from the Marcom activities? What are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to achieve more hits to your website, or are you trying to achieve actual sales, more sales? Ultimately, that's what everybody wants, of course. But at this stage, what is important? Are you trying to just get your company out on the map? Maybe so people can know about what your company's all about. That's also important. Know that they exist. You have to understand the goal, come up with a goal and formulate that, and the milestones along to get that goal. Get to that goal. Tactics are a little bit different. The idea of tactics is once you've got your overall plan, how are you going to implement it? Okay, what are you going to do? Let's say if you wanted to go to innovators first, I mean, how are you going to do that? Are you going to send out mailings? Are you going to contact them through emails? Are you going to knock on the door, and go door to door? Are you going to sell it? Are you going to come up with a sales group? People that will go out there and sell. What are you going to do exactly? You have to come up with some real strategy that or tactics that will actually work, and not just say, well, we're going to do this and we're going to do that, but you don't really know how you're going to do it. Okay, the details: what, when, how, who. Come up with something. And I've seen a lot of people fail at this stage because they come up with some general strategy, but they don't really ever get to a tactics. Okay, they don't know how to sell. They're not sure how to even hire a salesman. They don't really know how to get a sales force together. They're not sure how to go about actually getting into that group that they want to sell to. They don't know how to contact distributors, whatever it is. But they seem to be just they came up with a great product and they're just kind of floating along with it. Okay, a lot of small companies try to make it and never do, because even though they might get all kinds of awards and in design shows and all kinds of high-tech shows, and everybody loves them and they're in the news all the time and this and that, but that's it. Then they don't get beyond that because they really don't know practically how to go about making a business out of it. Okay. And that's important. Okay, so that's the basic ideas that in Marcom 1 and 2. Read over the lecture and have a good time with it, and I think you should be okay with it. I don't think you should have any problems. If you have any problems, you can email me and let me know. Okay?